We all know how this goes. We've done it for 10 plus years now. We hype up the Chargers, then they disappoint. So I say we just predict this is going to be the lamest, most average standard 9-8 football team of all time. They're not even going to be that fun to watch. Nobody should even talk about them. And then maybe if we do that, Justin Herbert will decide to show up in the playoffs this year. Welcome in, everybody. Welcome in, Chargers fans who didn't click off the video from that unnecessary cold open. So sorry about that. Probably bad business, but what are you going to do, right? We are here with the Chargers Deep Dive season preview video here. And hey, the Chargers crack the top 10 of the power rankings, kicking off our top 10 here. Can't believe we've come this far with this series. Really excited for today's deep dive. Obviously, the Chargers have some expectations, most notably getting those two tackles back into the lineup that went down last year that really defined last year's Chargers season as Justin Herbert was running for his life for the vast majority of the season. But there's so much more to get into here today. Really looking forward to it. Please do take a second to hit that like button down below if you've enjoyed this series, if you enjoy today's video. It really does help me out. And of course, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the remaining top 10 countdown here as we lead up through this deep dive series to the number one team in my power rankings. But without further ado, let's begin. As always, we go through every aspect of this team through the roster and the coaching staff. And at the beginning of every segment, we take a look at their offseason changes at every different spot of the team and ask the big question: did they get better, worse, or stay the same? And we will begin with the Chargers coaching staff, where it's a little bit of both. They have one massive departure of a coordinator and one massive addition of a coordinator. The departure, Jesse Minter takes the head coaching job with the Baltimore Ravens. Minter is up there in terms of defensive coordinators that have gotten a lot out of nothing. The old making chicken salad out of you-know-what. He's done a lot of making chicken salad here for this Chargers defense. He's going to be missed. But on the other hand, you go from Greg Roman, not everybody's favorite coordinator, to put it lightly, to Mike McDaniel, who gets let go by the Dolphins, one of the most well-respected offensive minds in the entire league. I don't remember a more drastic shift in coaching power inside of a team in an individual offseason, where you go from, the sliders tilted largely towards defense being where you're good at coaching, back in the opposite direction. Now, of course, we will see what the new defensive coordinator, Chris O'Leary, can do. And if he can do half the job Jesse Minter did, the Chargers are really going to be in business here. But as far as answering the big question, did they get better or worse? I said offensively, upgraded. Defensively, downgraded. I think that's fair and pretty clear in both regards. But let's talk about this Chargers coaching staff here. The Chargers are one of the few teams in the league where you have a true CEO-style approach with the head coach in Jim Harbaugh, and that is why the coordinators play such a big role here. And there are certainly some CEO-style coaches around the league that I'm not a huge fan of, because in so many cases, these guys are only as good as their coordinators. And as you will see, these guys can lose those coordinators at any given moment as soon as something goes well. But if you're going to be a CEO-style head coach, you might as well be Jim Harbaugh, who is an elite leader of the organization, one of the best coaches in the NFL at igniting a locker room, creating not just energy and on-the-field effort, which definitely is tangible when you watch this Chargers team and seeing them go from Brandon Staley's Chargers to Jim Harbaugh's Chargers. It was like overnight, they are a more physical team. And that's something Jim Harbaugh brings to the table. But not just that, but also creating that locker room buy-in, knowing, okay, Jim's won wherever he's gone. That's going to happen here as long as we come together as a team. So I do really like Jim Harbaugh. He comes in as my 12th ranked head coach at the top of this Chargers coaching hierarchy, and you will see the Chargers get very high ranks for that overall coach and culture grade that I give every team in this series. They rank 4th to 7th with an A grade for that overall coaching culture, which is sort of your benefit of the doubt slider that sprinkles through the entire team with how I kind of calculate things. But like I said, the coordinators are extremely important when you have a CEO style coach. So let's talk about both the coordinators here. And we'll begin on offense with Mike McDaniel coming in from the Dolphins. And I just got to say, man, the commonly discussed shortcomings of Mike McDaniel as a head coach is exactly what we just praised Jim Harbaugh for. Could he create the buy-in and the intensity and the physicality as this kind of like X's and O's nerd? That was the common criticism of Mike McDaniel as a head coach in Miami. I'll defend McDaniel a little bit. I actually thought the Dolphins played more physical down the stretch in a losing season last year, and you know, the narrative didn't really fit what I was watching with my eyeballs on the tape. So I'll defend him for a second there. But that's the common theme with Mike McDaniel, right? Well, you talk about players and coaches complimenting each other. What we know Mike McDaniel can do is scheme up an offense and elevate a roster to unbelievable levels. I mean, he had the offense with Tua Tagovailoa as his quarterback absolutely cooking for years in Miami. So if you're looking at Jim Harbaugh and saying, well, he's an elite leader, doesn't bring too much to the table in terms of schematic elevation, vice versa for Mike McDaniel, talk about two puzzle pieces coming together to create something potentially very, very special here with the Chargers. And if you are going to get excited about where this team could go this year, I think it's that bridge right there that really hammers it home for me. But yeah, you're going to see very high rankings for the offensive coaching for me. Run game coaching, especially. I have the Chargers ranked third under Mike McDaniel. Pass game coaching and design ranking 5th to 9th. So also top 10 in that category. So you're really getting one of the best, most prominent offensive minds in the entire league dropped into this thing. And that's super exciting. As far as what McDaniel does schematically speaking, it's all under that Kyle Shanahan offensive kind of foundation, if you will, where it is a lot of under center, heavy personnel, marry the run and pass through most notably an outside zone based run game and play action that's designed to look like those outside runs. But Mike McDaniel has kind of created his own little fork in the road or branch off of the Kyle Shanahan tree. Once he got to Miami, he probably had this whole, notebook, if not 20 notebooks of different stuff he wanted to try that Kyle never let him do in San Francisco. And he built almost his whole offense out of it. So you get all sorts of funky motions pre-snap, different formations. You got different guys lining up in the backfield, running backs lined up at wide receiver, catching screen passes, and really coming in and proving that there was so much more to be unlocked inside a Shanahan-style scheme that even Kyle Shanahan wasn't fully tapping into. You especially think of the very first time Mike McDaniel got there, the use of that little cheat motion, almost like a Canadian football team would have, where you're motioning guy kind of at a full speed before the snap, and then that allows him a free release into the middle of the defense. You make it a speed player like Tyreek Hill, and your ability to stress zone defenses, having to cover whether it's a dig or a hitch or an out route 15 yards down the field, and cover that within pretty much the snap of a finger, while also those linebackers and safeties have to worry about that same play being a crack toss or outside zone. He puts so much stress on the defense. And as long as he has a quarterback that will trust that those throws are going to be there, they can snap that head around off of play action and boom, you have that receiver open. It's a thing of beauty when it's working, man. And it was even a thing of beauty under Tua Tagovailoa. So Justin Herbert, I think, can absolutely run that type of an offense. I think McDaniel's got lots of toys in terms of the weaponry that we'll break down in this video to do some of that creative stuff with. And this thing could look really, really exciting. The one downside is, gun to my head, do I think Mike McDaniel is a head coach in 2027 again? Yeah, I would have to say yes. I think this is going to work, and hopefully the Chargers can get it done, but you probably will end up having to hit the reset button on this thing again in 2027. But for now, this is going to be riveting, to say the least. Now, it's a different conversation on the flip side with Chris O'Leary getting hired. I don't want to say out of nowhere, but I certainly had to do some digging into who Chris O'Leary was prior to this video to learn a little bit about him, because he gets hired as the defensive coordinator at Western Michigan last season. And I didn't watch a ton of Western Michigan football last year. Did a little bit of Nadame Tucker, who did end up on this team, which is fun. But O'Leary was with Jesse Minter and this Chargers team for a year in 2024. So they know him, and he knows the Chargers, and this is almost guaranteed to be a continuation of the Jesse Minter system, which is really the Mike McDaniel system here, but a complete unknown. I mean, he was a part of the Notre Dame staff before that 1 year with the Chargers, so largely like a young ascending college mind that spent 1 year as a position coach in the NFL. So as far as ranking him, he is going to come in that category of not bad defensive coordinators. I've said this before. I don't really circle any DCs in the league right now and say that's a problem. There's just a lot of other DCs that are better than others. And you have this cluster really tied at the bottom of the league of just truly unproven DCs. And that's where the Chargers and Chris O'Leary are going to come in. It's just the nature of this series. It's going to be one of the biggest wild cards for this team this year is, can you get even close to the level of defensive coaching with the combination of teaching the system, getting everybody up to speed, and then, of course, from a play calling perspective as well, can you get anything close to what they got from Jesse Minter, who was top 5, top 7 at worst in terms of the DCs doing the best of jobs around the league? So big shoes to fill, and we're just going to have to wait and see how he does here. What we can do is talk about what this system is and looks like. And this is the modern meta Mike McDaniel system that the Chargers have implemented here. And to me, there's really two main things you can look at with the Mike McDaniel system that highlight what these teams do and why it works. And you can kind of split it up between the back end with the coverage structure and the front end with how they design their fronts. So we'll start up front, where it's a 3-4 base structure. However, Mike McDaniel, the Chargers, Jesse Minter, all these teams prefer to live in a base nickel, and more specifically, a base nickel that utilizes a big star defender in that nickel cornerback role. In most of these cases, we've seen it be kind of a traditional strong safety mold. So it was Kyle Hamilton in Baltimore, Derwin James here, Nicky Manwari in Seattle. And the reason these teams do that is that we saw probably 2021-ish, a lot of these kind of split safety, bend don't break zone, off zone style defenses. We're getting overwhelmed in the run game because you're lacking an extra big body. If you have to ask a smaller slot cornerback to have actual run fits, it's just another disadvantage on top of a system that is already not designed to stop the run. So if you are gonna live in nickel, to have someone that can actually get off blocks, fill the run, prevent yards after contact, it's a big deal. So you have that as your kind of formational base structure here, a big nickel. And then the other thing related to their fronts that has really become a staple of the Mike McDaniel system is how they coach and call their, say, third and pass or second and long type of situations, your true drop back pass game when you know the offense is going to have to pass against you. And historically speaking, you're going to look at an NFL playbook and it's all right, here's our maybe 8 formations we might call in a true drop back pass situation. Underneath those 8 formations, you might have 9 or 10 different blitzes that you're asking your players to learn. Mike McDaniel has come in and kind of rewired how that's coached. Instead of a bunch of different formations and different layers under that, says, here's all our blitzes. And instead of teaching every player what every different blitz looks like under every different formation, he will teach each individual blitz to every player and teach them that blitz at all 5 of those spots. There's a video of Mike McDaniel talking about how he coaches this, where he sets up 5 chairs in the gym. You have your D-line, run the blitz, and then they blow the whistle, you rotate to the next spot, run the same play again until everybody gets it. And the advantage to this is twofold. Number one is it really helps you pick matchup advantages. If you have different body types and different guys that can win in different ways, you can scout ahead and be like, oh, their right guard really struggles with power. Their left guard really struggles with, swim moves or whatever it is. And you can take an edge rusher and put them over that player. Whatever you got to do to find those matchup advantages, you can do that. But it also creates and I'll steal a term that is becoming more popular in NFL circles, but the illusion of complexity. For your opponent, they're looking at this defense and having no true idea about what blitzes you're running based on tendencies, based on where guys are lining up. To the opponent, they don't really know what's coming. But from your perspective, you have complete transparency about what you're doing. And in fact, the idea that you've kind of run that blitz from a different spot in a previous week actually gives you a better chemistry and a better understanding of what your role is on that blitz, because a lot of these are going to have those picks and stunts and stuff. So if last week you were the looper and you appreciated how that D tackle blew up the 2 guards and you got your free sack, the next week you're lined up as that disruptor and it's your job to blow up the double team. You have a better understanding of what you need to do and how it's going to help your teammates. So it works for very good reason, and it's why so many teams around the league are trying to replicate that system. And then you look on the back end and the coverage structure, and there's less to say there. It's very much like in the Fangio modern meta kind of world in terms of playing that off zone, pre-snap split safety defense where you're going to start in a 2 shell, and then you could end up in any number of coverages. The most consistent theme with all of these style of defenses is that it's going to be a zone heavy defense and a lot of cover 4, cover 6 type of stuff. Your cover 3 rotations where one safety's coming down, one's rotating into the post in the middle of the field. And that was no different here with the Chargers, where they were in the top half of the league in all cover 3, cover 4, and cover 6, and even still the 19th most cover 2. So still a decent amount of cover 2 as well, but 30th in cover 1 usage. You will see that base defense rate is very low with the Chargers because they have Derwin James. Their base defense, like I described, is largely going to be that 4-2 big nickel style front, or 2-4 if you want to call it that way too, because they are kind of a stand-up edge style team more often than not. And then even though you praise kind of the blitz design that they run in the Mike McDaniel system, they don't actually want to blitz a ton. You want to put the fear of that blitz and walk a bunch of guys up and cause that confusion. But a lot of these, I talk about the 5 chairs and moving guys around. A lot of those looks is one guy's going to be dropping back. So you're actually only rushing 4, which isn't going to get charted as a blitz, but you are going to be running picks and loops. And sometimes, if you're walking, say, Tuli Pelotu over the right guard, you assume that they're going to slant in that direction. All of a sudden, one of those guys on the right side drops out. You got a numbers advantage over to the other side, that type of deal. So you can create some of that phantom pressure, getting the same effect of rushing 5 while actually getting an added guy in coverage. So they don't actually blitz a ton in terms of actually sending more than 4 players. But when they do, you better be ready for it. And it's damn effective the way that they can scheme that thing up. So there is the scheme conversation on a Mike McDaniel defense and the Chargers. Really, the big question is not if this system can work. We know it works. We just saw the, architect of this system win the Super Bowl with the Seahawks. It's more of, can Chris O'Leary run this system well? And there's reason to believe he can. We just don't really know. So that's a big wild card for this team this season. Now, before we get into this roster here, I do want to thank the sponsor for today's deep dive, and that is my friends over at Prize Picks. You guys, we've got NFL preseason here, and I'm happy football's back, but it's already hit me, third, fourth quarter of these preseason games, a bit of a grind to sit through. But if you've got a Prize Picks lineup going, it definitely helps you stay glued to your seat and more interested through the end of these preseason games with a chance to win some money on your Prize Picks lineups, where you select player stats more or less on anything from passing yards to a backup running back to get a touchdown, the field goal kicker, all of it, you name it. They also have season-long options up there as well right now. My favorite lineup right now is Ruben Bain to get more than 5.5 sacks. You guys know how much I love Ruben Bain. Fading by Shell Tootin a little bit here, lower than 725 rushing yards for this season, because I do think Chris Rodriguez is going to be underrated this year and eat into that workload a little bit. And then keeping it simple with Bijan Robinson to be a monster this year, which I fully expect, higher than 1,750 total yards between rush and receiving, the engine of that Falcons offense. Prize Picks even has the ability to pick the winner, point spread, and total on just about any major sporting event you can think of. And that's available in most states, including California, Texas, and Florida. So right now, if you sign up using code HMA, you can take advantage of their special offer where you can get $150 if you win your first $5 lineup. Big thanks to Prize Picks for sponsoring today's deep dive. And let's now get into the good stuff and break down this Chargers roster. And we will begin at quarterback. And we can kind of gloss over the offseason changes. No change there, staying neutral. And I do apologize for throwing the stray at Justin Herbert in the intro. You have to admit it's a little eye-opening at this point that he just can't seem to get over the hump as soon as the moment is as big as it can get. The playoffs come around, and dude, Justin Herbert was impossibly bad in the last 2 playoff appearances. And at the end of the day, that's really where we're at with Justin Herbert. Is like he's I'm gonna make a Call of Duty reference here. He's hit level 55 or whatever they make the max level. It's time for Justin Herbert to hit prestige mode, to go to that next level and prove himself there. Because when it comes to low stakes games, regular season, he's hit that max level. He's shown us what he's totally capable of. But he is kind of in this unique territory where it's like, dude, Herbert, you as the talent and great quarterback that you are, you're the reason the expectation bar gets raised for this team. But I think we're all kind of tired of seeing him get to the playoffs and honestly play like crap. And I, as much as anybody, think, we can spend too much time obsessing about how a guy does in the playoffs or debating, is a guy clutch and some of these more like subjective measures of quarterback play, if you will. But it is especially notable with Justin Herbert when you load up the tape against the Patriots this last year, the Texans the year before that, and you're like, dude, he's missing throws he doesn't normally miss. He gets flustered in the pocket. He's making horrible mistakes with the ball, and it's just like, how does this keep happening? What's going on here? Is he just wired in a different way that's just not working here? We just need to see it, because when Justin Herbert is on, what's left to say? I mean, he has all the physical tools in the world. We've seen him be a great processor and decision maker. Even last year, I think he showed a better job of using that athleticism, being more of a playmaker out of structure. I think that was awesome to see, and I hope that is here to stay. I love what he can do when he uses his feet, and that arm on the run is just jaw-dropping. He has literally given us every reason to call him a elite quarterback, other than the fact that typically is affiliated with being a quarterback that drives a team to playoff success. And for whatever reason, that is just stalled here. And it's not just excuses around him. It is his own play in that part of the season that has held him back. So I know it's exhausting to hear as a Chargers fan, and I'm even uncomfortable providing that type of analysis because that type of line of thinking typically bothers me. But it is kind of unique in this case with Justin Herbert. So, I mean, he heads into the year as my 6th ranked quarterback, even 5th in my passing grade, gets passed up by I guess I'll just spoil it, gets passed up by Lamar Jackson, who would rank just behind him from a passing game standpoint, but it does surpass him because of the added benefit of the legs and the run game being at an elite level with Lamar. But I mean, I feel like that's a pretty damn good spot to be at with Justin Herbert. And even as some of these ugly playoff moments have started to stack up, I all of a sudden find myself high on Justin Herbert, with some people just getting kind of tired of him at this point. So go get it done, Herbert. I do believe in his ability to do so. And certainly you can talk about, like, the offensive line was not good last year, and we know pocket trauma is a real thing. And when the pass rush is hot and heavy all the time, it's hard to trust that you can get to the top of your drop and play in structure, and your internal clock gets all sort of messed up. I think that's all relevant. Those are all relevant excuses for Justin Herbert. The one thing I will at least bring up is that I've never thought Justin Herbert has that elite pocket feel that a lot of the game's true elite quarterbacks do have. That ability to just kind of calmly mitigate pressure, have that spatial awareness in the pocket, the know-how, that kind of eye in the back of his head ability to navigate that space. It's always been a little bit lacking with Justin Herbert, and I think when his offensive line struggles, I do think it impacts him more than it would with like a Joe Burrow or Mahomes in the peak of his powers, or Rodgers or Tom Brady in the peak of theirs. And there's a chance that is leading to some of these playoff moments. But generally speaking, I do think Herbert is a phenomenal quarterback, and a tier 2 guy that you should expect to be able to win a Super Bowl with this guy, with how good he is at this position. And hopefully the surrounding cast can get him in a better spot to go out and execute when January rolls around. We got to see it, man. But realistically speaking, Justin Herbert is a core driver towards the Chargers being in the top 10 of these power rankings, being Super Bowl contenders, and yes, giving you hope for this team that they can go out and get it done this year. So there's Justin Herbert as your 6th ranked quarterback as we head into the start of this season. Now you do have Trey Lance as the backup here. I'd be lying if the football fan in me deep down doesn't have a hint of fascination if something could click for him, just because he was so raw coming out. Having just played one season at North Dakota State amidst all the COVID stuff. He is physically talented, but realistically was probably just a product of a weird football and draft environment at the time. And probably nothing, the probability that everything clicks for Trey Lance is pretty low, but he is physically talented, and he's had a couple of nice starts, whether that's, in the regular season, preseason. There's been some flashes of moments with him, but ultimately this team's season is realistically over if anything were to happen to Justin Herbert. So hopefully I was able to navigate the Herbert discourse there, because he's got his haters, and my goodness, does he have his defenders as well. Just trying to give kind of my stance on where I'm at with him in the league framework, if you will. But it's not just about Justin Herbert. This is also a team sport, and yeah, Herbert could use some more help here as well, especially with the offensive line. But we are next going to go to the backfield here. We'll take a look at their offseason changes at running back. I guess you can list Najee Harris just because he was a decent-sized free agent signing for them, but was largely unavailable, played just 4% of snaps, so a pretty unsubstantial loss there. They do bring in Keaton Mitchell from the Ravens. Fun player to talk about here. I ultimately said neutral. You could argue for slightly upgraded. I don't know if Keaton Mitchell quite moves the needle enough for me to go that far, but not that it wasn't a nice addition here. So I have the Chargers ranked right in the middle of the league at running back, ranking 16th to 18th, which is a very good floor. But you are kind of hoping, if you're a Chargers fan, you can crack into the top 10, I think, this year as far as your backfield is concerned. And that's going to stem around your first-round pick last year, with all the talent in the world, Marion Hampton. And I think it's reasonable. I mean, Hampton is super talented. He's got a rare blend of size, speed, agility, and physicality. I mean, he is the full package. It's why he was very reasonably viewed as a first-round running back prospect. And man, if he wasn't in Ashton Ginty's draft class, we'd be talking about him in even a larger mindset, I think, heading into last year. But yeah, I'm a believer, man. And I really like that we saw, because I mean, I'm a huge fan of Hampton and everything, but I'll be honest, like the first month of last year, watching him get carries, it was kind of a like, just, he just didn't look that good in the first month. Something was off. The vision, I think, was just a little bit, it took a little bit to come along. It was just a little bit of hesitation. He didn't feel like the same Omarion Hampton that we watched at North Carolina. And there was no overreactions that needed to be had, but certainly observations of like, a little bit of a slow start here. And honestly, I think what Hampton did in the first month last year is why the Cardinals are like wanting to give Jeremiah Love touches in the preseason, because they're like, let's get him up to NFL speed a little bit faster there. But anyway, those worries pretty quickly faded away as the season went on. And I think you watch him in the second half of the year especially, you're like, all right, he's seeing things. He's running hard. He's using that power, his ability to lower the shoulder paired with his momentum, the speed burst momentum that he can generate into tackles and fight for tough yards and even just truck dudes straight up. It's real. The fact that he's got the jump cut that he has at his size is special. He has breakaway speed, which is rare for a 220 plus pound back. And I think the vision got better. There's still some moments where he's a little bit bounce happy, and I think they're going to want to find the perfect blend with him. And that, I think, is an area where, that's where the up arrow is, especially, is just consistently picking the right hole, knowing when to bounce, when not to bounce. That's just something for him to develop. I wouldn't describe him as having bad vision, but I wouldn't describe it as good vision either. It's just a little inconsistent right now. So that's a big thing to look at for him. Other than that, it's just going out, proving the production, which in his rookie season, he was splitting carries a little bit. You obviously have to mention, like, he missed half the season as well. So that's gonna, I don't think it's a hot take to say that missing half the season is going to hurt your production. So he's just got to go out and, climb the ladder, really. But I think he can do it. There's a lot to like with Omarion Hampton, and I'm a believer. I really am. And then you have a very interesting backup group here. You have Keaton Mitchell, who gets brought in. He's going to be viewed by Mike McDaniel as his Devon Achane as long as Keaton Mitchell is available. And that has been the, poster board 90% of the entire problem with Keaton Mitchell is the poor guy, his body just turns into dust at any given moment. He's passed the eye test when he's touched the ball. There's no doubt about it. He has incredible juice. There are moments where I've discussed him just like Devon Achane and James Cook. Like, on a per touch basis, you can see it. It's just the per touch thing. Like, you can only give him the ball 40 times in a season. And that's why he's not playing in the preseason either. Like, why would you risk it? So he's talented. We know that. And, his health, it's a wild card. I do believe in a Mike McDaniel offense that loves running, crack toss, getting the ball to the boundary. Him as a jolt of lightning, a big play threat. There's a ton of potential for him to make a big impact on a per touch basis. Like, could Keaton Mitchell have 35 carries this year for, all right, let's do some math real quick, for, let's call it 10 yards. Can he have 450 yards on 30 touches? That might be a little crazy, but something in that range, maybe. I don't think that's crazy, but it's just pretty unreasonable to envision him holding up getting any more than 3 touches a game, throughout the course of a season on average. And that's where Kamani Vidal comes in. And as a Kamani Vidal truther, I was a little bit bummed to see Keaton Mitchell sign here, because I do think Vidal can also do a lot of that stuff out in space. Vidal has a ton of speed. And I think if Keaton Mitchell gets hurt, or when Keaton Mitchell gets hurt, Vidal's going to have some efficiency with his touches as well. So they really do run three deep in that sense. I think Vidal brings more size to the table. We saw Vidal step in, and he had some really good games for the Chargers. But it, as much as of a Kamani Vidal diehard truther that I am, there was also some games too where you saw some deficiencies with his vision and sometimes his size. Like, he's not a Marion Hampton. He is thick for his size, but he still doesn't have the true power of a power style back. So there's some deficiencies in Vidal's game. He's probably more of an RB2. But to be your RB3 on this team, or RB2.5, that's still a nice asset. So you'd rather him be here than him not be here. If I was a team that needed some depth and guys to get touches in my backfield, I would probably be making some phone calls about Kamani Vidal. But I don't know the Chargers necessarily want to give him up either, because they know Keaton Mitchell is about as close to a 0 injury rating in Madden as you could envision in real life. You also have Jarrett Patterson, who's gotten his fair share of touches in the league. And there were some points last season, it felt like, that he started to take some carries back away from Vidal, because I think they trusted Patterson's vision a little bit more. But he is even smaller and has no juice. Like, he is maxed out, but as a deep depth player, he has his usefulness in terms of just getting what's blocked up and knowing what you're getting. So there's your backfield, really. I don't see much of an opportunity for the undrafted types to crack this backfield. But it's a good backfield. They rank 16th to 18th. And if Marion Hampton can prove himself and climb the ladder, he could be a top 5 to 10 running back in the NFL. There's different shades of some of the different elite backs in the NFL in a Marion Hampton. I see some Jonathan Taylor. I see some Joe Mixon in his prime, who, when healthy, was a top 5 back in the NFL, in my opinion. There's some blend of that, those tools. So he's a really good player, was a first-round pick for a reason. And let's see what he can do here this year. Now, let's go to the pass catchers here for the Chargers. And they did make some offseason changes here. Just really one flip at wide receiver. They say goodbye to Keenan Allen, who is, a moderate loss. He had a decent season, but I had to hold myself back from actually calling that addition by subtraction. Last year I got into it with Chargers fans a little bit because I was like kind of disappointed that they felt the need to bring Keenan Allen back. Not that he can't play anymore, or that it wasn't, nostalgic and fun that he came back, but I was kind of like, you had what you had in Ladd. You have these young players. They spent a second-round pick on Trey Harris. It was like, maybe trust yourself a little bit more, that these young players with certainly more explosiveness can kind of break through for you. And it just never really felt like they needed Keenan Allen. It felt like all he did was take away touches from Ladd McConkey, honestly, who's just such a better, more explosive version of what Keenan Allen can do for you at this point. And I do think it was kind of a why are you here type of signing with Keenan Allen, with these young guys all kind of stepping up. So I'm personally looking at this as addition by subtraction. I think a lot of Chargers fans probably agree with me on that front. Just to keep things consistent, he didn't suck. He wasn't great. He had some frustrating moments in big spots that you wish Ladd McConkey was getting those targets instead, but he is still on paper a moderate loss. But even with just Brennan Thompson, a 4th-round pick with some speed coming in here, I'm still going to call it neutral at wide receiver. I cannot bring myself to call this downgraded as a unit overall, even with the loss of Keenan Allen on paper. And then at tight end, massive changes here, and all for the better. I mean, this tight end room was a massive disappointment last year, and not Oronde Gadsden. He's a receiving entity, but Disley missed some time and is just such a lack of a threat as a receiving entity that they needed more from that as their true tight end. And he missed some time. You had Conklin and Fisk had to play and really struggled. They needed more from their heavy personnel guys in a Jim Harbaugh inspired and now Mike McDaniel inspired offense. They go out and get Charlie Kolar, a lot of familiarity there, from the Harbaugh East Academy in Baltimore. And then Alec Ingold was McDaniel's fullback in Baltimore. They bring both those guys in here. I love that. They did sign David Njoku. That to me is like this year's Keenan Allen signing, where I'm like, okay, on paper it's a solid addition, but like that's one where, okay, he doesn't really block. All you're doing is making things more muddy and taking things away from Oronde Gadsden. I'm actually not a huge fan of that signing. When I saw that come off the ticker, the ESPN ticker, I was like, really? That's where Njoku went? Okay. But I do really like the Kolar Ingold additions and definitely calling this tight end room upgraded. So let's break down this group of weapons. It's a very solid group of pass catchers. They rank 18th to 23rd for me in a league flooded with great pass catching units. But this is definitely, a unit that can be enough for a Justin Herbert and the level of quarterback he is, and a team looking for Super Bowl expectations. They got a little bit of everything here, and I like this group of pass catchers, even if I'm not going to rank it up with like the top 10 groups or anything like that. But I love getting to start with Ladd McConkey here. Keenan Allen's out of the picture, and now Ladd can really thrive, especially in a Mike McDaniel offense. I mean, it is not hyperbole or a stretch or a reach or a bad take to say there are similarities between what Ladd McConkey can do and what Tyreek Hill did in this offense under Mike McDaniel. I talked about earlier the kind of use of cheat motion, the ability to just bolt, and pun unintended, but it works even better there, bolt into the second level of the defense, threaten these zone coverages that all these teams are running now. It's a zone league. Hitch routes, in breakers, crossers, dig routes, out routes. The ability to just, you run a play action fake, Herbert gets his head around, and you've got Ladd McConkey threatening the second level of the defense by the time Herbert snaps that head around. He has the acceleration and speed and route running in that part of the field to be a demon. And yeah, we think of Tyreek Hill, getting 50 yards down the field where he can do some stuff there that maybe Ladd isn't going to project as well at. But you especially look at that intermediate part of the field. I think this is going to be a match made in heaven. And I think Ladd McConkey is going to absolutely eat inside this offense. In fact, we even saw some moments in last year's Chargers offense where they would tap into that cheat motion and all the things we're describing, but you're going to see it tenfold in this offense. And I didn't put the up arrow on Ladd McConkey last year inside the confines, the restrictive confines of a Greg Roman offense. I'm putting it on him this year. I think Ladd McConkey could be one of the most productive receivers in the NFL this year, and take that leap closer to like top 10 wide receiver conversation. So I'm pretty damn stoked about what he brings to the table. And then with that, you have other complementary groups of weapons here as well. I spend a lot of time talking about complementary skill sets and building groups of weapons the right way. You've got a lot of that here. So with Ladd being kind of your undersized speed threat, you have some more big physical-minded wide receivers in Quentin Johnston and Trey Harris. And these guys are a little bit different, but they have some similarities as well. You look at Quentin Johnston, and he's a little bit of an enigma right now, because one thing he did really well coming out that you thought was going to be a big part of his like NFL game and projection was the run after catch ability, and kind of the idea that he could be something like a Debo with his size and the vision in space, the juke moves, the contact balance. It just hasn't been there as an NFL player. For example, his 39th out of 47 eligible receivers. Last year in yards after catch average, 37th out of 47 in total yards after the catch. And that lack of juice in that area has just left a little bit to be desired on Quentin Johnston. Then earlier in his career, as you would have kind of expected out of his TCU tape, it was like he's got a lot to learn as a route runner, playing through contact. The hands were shaky coming out. He's had to develop in those areas, and he has. And he's developed them enough to turn into a very useful kind of like X receiver in many ways. Like his ability to beat press was one of his strengths at TCU, and that has helped him create vertical stack on the outside, pair with such a phenomenal deep ball thrower in Justin Herbert, who's still top 3 at worst in terms of guys I want throwing a go ball or a deep post You get some big moments as a vertical threat, and I'm excited to see how Mike McDaniel's going to open up, Quentin Johnston down the field a little bit as well. So I do think Quentin as kind of a half perimeter X, half like vertical Z, kind of doing a little bit of both of those roles in a Mike McDaniel offense can work. I am a little bit curious, like a big part of Mike McDaniel's like having two of these speed threats with like Hill and Waddle and that kind of idea to have multiple guys to quickly threaten that second level of the defense. Is Quentin going to be able to be good at that? Does he have the acceleration and timing aspect of his game to be a part of that level of the offense? I'm not saying he can't. I'm not necessarily projecting that he's going to be used in that way either. But he has definitely settled in as a very solid kind of perimeter starting wide receiver. Maybe not the most trustworthy guy, but his ability to win tough catches and not drop the ball has really settled down. And, has he lived up to his expectations as a first round pick? No, he hasn't been a complete and utter bust either. So he's kind of your number two. And then you have Trey Harris. And this is where, like, I see how these guys can coexist, but they're also pretty similar in a lot of ways. Trey Harris coming out of Ole Miss, and you kind of have to look at him coming out of Ole Miss because he hardly played here last year. Thanks for nothing, Keenan Allen. But Trey Harris definitely coming out has that skill set that we kind of just described with Quentin Johnston, where it's, okay, you're working the vertical sideline, go balls, hitches, the occasional dig, the occasional slant. So there's some quote unquote redundancy of skill set with these two guys. Not that they can't coexist around a Lad McConkey. But I do think there's some differences with these guys as well. I would say Quentin has the edge in terms of speed and vertical stack. Trey Harris, I would give the edge, honestly, in terms of physicality. And I would maybe go a step farther in saying like dependability. I think Harris still has a lot to prove and a lot to learn there, but I've always seen a little bit of Michael Pittman in Trey Harris in terms of when it flashes, the ability to like jolt open on a slant, box out the defender, or edge out an encroaching safety or linebacker on a dig route over the middle of the field, box guys out for tough catches. And he was 6 for 8 on contested catch targets in his small sample size last year for the Chargers. So at the end of the day, I think now getting more of a clear path to playing time with Keenan Allen out of the picture here, I think both Quentin and Trey Harris can coexist, but probably doing somewhat similar things for this offense. And Mike McDaniel may be more leveraging the speed aspect of a Quentin Johnston a little more, and with Trey Harris more leveraging, okay, it's 3rd and 6. We need someone to, move the chains here on a comeback or a crossing route or a slant or whatever it might be. And Trey Harris, I think, has a little bit to like too after the catch, by the way. He was actually more efficient in terms of missed tackles forced per catch, yards after catch than like Quentin Johnston. So if you are looking at someone to get some more of those gadget touches and be a playmaker, or not even gadget touches, but just throw a screen to on the perimeter, let him go to work like we've seen, Michael Pittman with the Colts, for example, get used in that way. So I think there's definitely a good bit to be unlocked with Trey Harris. And both these guys are going to be pretty damn solid. I don't think either of these guys have like massive, colossal breakout seasons or anything like that. But around a Lad McConkey, I think it's pretty easy to understand how like two bigger, more outside-focused wide receivers can have success surrounding a Lad McConkey who's going to do the majority of his work over the middle of the field and from the slot. And then I am interested to see how much they lean into Brennan Thompson, because I mentioned a little bit when we talked about Quentin Johnston. Mike McDaniel has largely enjoyed having multiple speed receivers that can attack that intermediate part of the field off of those quick hitting play action passes that we've discussed. So if you want another guy that can come from a cheat motion or being covered up by one of these, Trey Harris or Quentin Johnston at the line of scrimmage, where you're not going to get pressed at the line, and you want another guy to be more of your kind of Jalen Waddle here to Ladd McConkey's Tyreek Hill, and have multiple guys that can quickly threaten that middle of the field. Brennan Thompson has some hyper burners on him, man, and I liked him a good bit. And I think he very quickly went from combine runs like a, what did he run? 4.26? Yeah, 4.26. You get that initial bump of like, everybody needs to go watch this guy now, in terms of like draft analysis, draft analysts and stuff. And then in the couple months after that, leading up to the draft, he got like no buzz and everybody stopped talking about him. And it's almost like he kind of got lumped with like Jeff Caldwell out of Cincinnati, who also ran like a 4.2 something. Jeff Caldwell, his tape stunk. Brennan Thompson's tape didn't stink. Like, he can run routes. He actually can track the ball down the field. The speed really freaking plays with him. Like, he gave defenses problems. It's just in college football, teams and their quarterbacks have a harder time making the most of these vertical threats. You're now pairing him with Mike McDaniel and Justin Herbert. So, like, I get pretty excited about him coming in here. And this was kind of the first guy that Mike McDaniel gets to kind of handpick. We saw the clip of him from the Inside Access of how, like, what did he say? If you find a way to get me Brennan Thompson, I'll take my shirt off. Like, I think there's a lot there. So, like, I already thought this was a draft steal in a vacuum. They take him in the 4th round. He had a 2nd to a 3rd round grade for me. But you pair it in the right fit. We talk so often about the landing spot for these interesting players can matter just as much as the evaluation and the talent. I think you have both of those situations here with Thompson, but this could be, let's do it again. Let's make the pun. This could be electric here with him and Ladd and their speed attack in the middle of the field. You've got more of these bigger perimeter options in Quentin and Trey Harris. All right. I can see how that works. And maybe I'm even talking myself into a little bit, talking against that idea of, could this be a top 10 group of weapons? Maybe we do even get there. But that does feel like maybe a season away or a tick early before we get into that conversation. But that can really work. And then, okay, let's bang out the rest of the wide receiver depth. There's not much left, but we do still have some interesting tight ends to talk about here. So, Keandre Lambert-Smith was another decent 5th round pick, just kind of get dropped into the mix here. Very much a vertical threat. Like, the best case scenario for him was going to be kind of like a Darius Slayton type of guy. But as Quentin's kind of figured out, Trey looks like a hit. I don't know if we can call Trey Harris a hit yet, but he looks pretty good. You bring in Brennan Thompson. The opportunity for a Lambert-Smith is going to be reduced here, but I'm still intrigued just by the talent here. And then you have Darius Davis, who's more of a kick returner. It has been really just a returner here. But you put that juice in the hands of a Mike McDaniel. Could he be like a better version of what they tried to get going with, Malik Washington in Miami last year? That's possible, but I just don't know how many opportunities there are there. And I certainly don't see anybody else really making the team as a wide receiver here. But yeah, you also have the tight ends here. And you've got some pretty good players in this tight end room. Like, Oronde Gadsden was sweet in his rookie season. And this was a kind of draft win for me. He was one of my biggest my guys, called this a steal, told everybody make sure you get him in your dynasty drafts and stuff. And man, did he hit the ground running even faster than I thought he would. I thought it would maybe take a couple years for him to really become an impact. But the receiving stuff clicked for him immediately. And that tape from Syracuse really translated. Like, he's more wide receiver than he is tight end, but he does play at about 235, 240. He's one of the worst blocking, quote unquote, starting tight ends in the league, if not the worst. So there's some complications with like how much you can use them in your early down formations here as you kind of bunch things up and want to have a good run game here as well. But as far as a guy that can be a mismatch problem, get open in the second level of the field, win tough catches, where that was what really stood out to me at Syracuse, was his ability to use that size to box guys out and be a trust throw guy over the middle of the field. He's not incredible after the catch. There's a little bit of shiftiness and something to like there, but it's largely just about getting into the second level of defense, making tough catches, something like a Zach Ertz. It was always kind of a best case scenario with Oronde Gadsden, and maybe we get to that point with him. I do think until the run blocking is more anything on earlier downs, I actually think we might see a regression in just his involvement in the offense, in this offense especially. I do. I think with Charlie Kolar here, you're going to see Gadsden just straight up come off the field a lot on first and second down because Kolar is a phenomenal lead blocker. He's a much better inline blocker than Gadsden, and he does enough as a receiving threat. And while Gadsden was a huge draft win for me, Charlie Kolar was one of my guys in that draft too. And I got to be pretty excited about Charlie Kolar here. And at the end of the day, like, okay, we put Gadsden up there with the starters right now. I don't think Gadsden's going to become an afterthought because the rookie season was really good. We're going to know the talent is there, but I would not be surprised if he kind of takes a back seat, at least for this season, as Mike McDaniel's here. And it's actually Charlie Kolar that breaks through and is like, okay, he's been largely a blocking focused player with Baltimore, but he was more of a receiving entity coming out of college. And there were some shades of Travis Kelce stuff with what he did at Iowa State. Got to be careful with that, obviously, because it's a Hall of Fame player. But he had some pretty special receiving tight end tape. The question was more of like, can he block? Now it's more the opposite. He's hardly gotten targeted in Baltimore. I think that's more misusage than anything. I'm actually putting the up arrow on Charlie Kolar. I'm not putting the down arrow on Oronde Gadsden, but I look at the history of Mike McDaniel and his tight ends, and I think it's some of that no block, no rock mentality where if you're not helping me set stuff up on early downs with the benefit of, heavy formations and getting teams to take you seriously as a blocker, I'm not going to get you involved in the receiving game. And I think that's going to benefit Charlie Kolar here a lot. So I'm actually envisioning a big year for Kolar here as a bit of a breakout candidate in a sense for this team. And then the other thing with Gadsden is the Njoku signing really muddies this thing up because Njoku's skill set is quite redundant with Gadsden. They're not identical, but it's kind of the same idea as like, okay, you're here because you're a mismatch problem and a receiving style tight end, not because of your blocking. David Njoku, like 3 years ago, reached a point where his blocking was adequate, and it's still probably better than Gadsden, and maybe he can get that version of himself back. But he's largely been like injured, not nasty in the trenches, and regressing. But they did give him $8 million. And he also is a better run after catch threat than Oronde Gadsden. So for early down stuff, if McDaniel's looking for his Jonnu Smith to just run a crossing route with and then be a handful after the catch, he's going to ask Njoku to do that, not Gadsden. So that kind of places Gadsden in a third down and pass only role where he's going to be competing for targets with Ladd McConkey and all these other guys. I don't see how Gadsden really has a big year here. I don't. A bummer for people looking for a young player to continue ascending in Gadsden, but not a bummer for Chargers fans looking to see this team win games. I think they have a little bit of everything they need here. And then you have Alec Ingold as well, who is still one of the better overall fullbacks in the league that gets to stay in this system. So it's going to be a massive blend of those guys. We didn't mention the receiving chops with too many of these backs. I think there's a lot to be unlocked there with Amarian Hampton, who didn't get the opportunity to show us too much in that rookie season. I definitely think Hampton needs to improve as a pass blocker, just in terms of blitz pickup and identifying what he needs to do. I think he's got the size and physicality to become a really good pass blocker. Vidal can catch the ball out of the backfield. Keaton Mitchell has actually strangely been underproductive as a receiving threat. I think that will be something to keep an eye on. Like, you think of Devon Achane and how often they used him on swing passes and quick touches and true screen passes. Like, if they're really looking at Keaton Mitchell as this team's Devon Achane, how much are they going to they're gonna feed the ball to him in some of those looks. Also, though, like they might just not want to do that because they don't think he can stay healthy if you give him that many touches. So they have guys to throw the ball to in the backfield as well that can contribute. Overall, I think the more you talk about this group in the hands of Mike McDaniel, the more and more you like it and the upside of it. They still have unproven commodities here, right? Like there's guys that have green up arrows that need to go out and prove it. But I think you can definitely see like they got enough to work with here for this to be a damn special offense here. Not just with Mike McDaniel, but you've got Justin Herbert that can access all three levels of the defense with ease, honestly, which is not something you can say about just about any quarterback in the league. But let's now move on to the biggest question mark for the Chargers, which is not a surprise to say that. The offensive line, which in so many ways, or in all of the ways, derailed the Chargers' upside as a football team and realistic hopes at winning a Super Bowl. I mean, at the end of the day, this was one of the worst offensive lines in the league last year. The Chargers knew that. And that is why they have one of the most hilarious looking offseason changes graphics that I've ever seen in the history of this channel. They have added 10 new offensive linemen here. And if you didn't know this, usually 10 offensive linemen make the team. Now, 2 of those additions are your franchise cornerstone tackle duo coming back from injury. Rashawn Slater, who didn't play last year, was a devastating injury before the season started, and Joe Alt, who played about a quarter of the season before going down for the year. But the rest of these are true additions. Tyler Biadasz, their starting center, and then a handful of draft picks, including Jake Slaughter in the 2nd round, Travis Burke in the 4th round, Harkey and Taylor in the 6th round, and I even noted Isaiah World, interesting priority free agent coming off of injury, probably won't be able to play this year. He's probably more of an IR stash. But also some veterans who have played a little bit, Cole Strange and Coyote Awasika in the mix for their starting guard jobs. A hilarious overhaul of additions. Now you're naturally going to see some players out. Zion Johnson, probably the best of which, an okay starting guard who leaves. Mekhi Becton, who they gave a bunch of money, and he immediately regressed. Not a huge loss. Well, a huge loss by mass, but on paper, not a significant loss. Jamari Sawyer did step in, and he ends up high-fiving Mike McDaniel on the way. He goes down to Miami. He stepped in valiantly as a swing lineman. Beyond that, their starting center last year, Bradley Bozeman, no longer with the team. Bobby Hart and Austin Deculus, those ones are more true addition by subtraction by anybody who was forced to watch this Chargers offensive line last year. So massively upgraded on the offensive line. I think it would be cool to pool together the most upgraded units from last year to this year and potentially even sneak in a video on that. So if you guys want to help me out and comment, like what were the most massively upgraded units, kind of help spark my memory, if you will, let me know what those might be in the comments down below. But this Chargers O-line, absolutely a candidate for the most upgraded unit from this offseason. Now, that does not mean they're through the woods entirely. It doesn't. They still rank as the 23rd offensive line for me heading into the year. 16th to 21st for pass blocking, which I think Chargers fans will happily accept that they are at least tied for middle of the league for pass blocking. Run blocking, on the other hand, they do rank 26th. That is the same actual grade, but there are more good run blocking lines in the league than pass blocking ones. So with that same grade, it actually came in a little bit lower, if that makes sense. But this is definitely a wild card unit for the Chargers. And it's mostly about just figuring out this guard situation. That's what really drags down the potential floor of this O-line and what gets them to be 23rd. Because I don't have any questions, and I don't know how you really could have any questions about the tackle duo. other than Rashawn Slater has had two gut-wrenching season-ending injuries between a patella tendon last year, which we've seen some better recoveries from that injury recently, but that was always viewed up there with like Achilles tears and ACLs that have ended careers in the past. But more optimistic in 2026 that he'll make a recovery there. The other season ender was a bicep tear, so unrelated there. Hopefully it's just a classic case of bad Chargers luck that could hopefully change this year. Other than the fact that he's had a couple of significant season-ending injuries in his career, Rashawn Slater's awesome. He's a top 5 to 8 left tackle in the NFL. There are a lot of great left tackles in the league. Rashawn Slater's one of them. An absolute technician in pass pro, a really nice anchor. He's a great athlete. He's a very good run blocker. I think he's a tick behind how great he is as a pass blocker as far as his run blocking is concerned. But he's a superstar, and he gets dropped back into this thing after not playing a snap last year, so that's huge. And then you got Joe Alt at right tackle, and this is a player where I think my own process holds me back a little bit, like as far as the rating you see on the screen with an 81 rating on Joe Alt, where like I, like everyone else, can see that this guy is on a trajectory to hopefully be in that like Penei Sewell, Tristan Wirfs like class of tackle where the sky is the limit. This guy's got length, athleticism. I think the anchor, he has room to get to that point where he is a great anchor. That was the one thing, was like he's a little bit on the undersized side of things as a 21-year-old coming out, like by elite NFL anchor standpoint. Like that's one area where if you see him lose, it's usually guys get into his chest and he has that kind of overwhelming knockback effect. But he's got the ability to eliminate that as a weakness. That athleticism plays as a run blocker. He's got the targeting system, the nastiness. He's wired the right way. I think I'm like everyone else. I agree. He can become that. He's played 22 and a half games in his career. He's not there yet. He doesn't have imperfect tape. But he's been about as good as you can ask of a tackle in the first 23 games of their career. I mean, hell, Penei Sewell, first half of his rookie season, he had his flaws, right? Tristan Wirfs, not so much. But him losing most of that second season is what's going to hold, like, for example, me back from coming out and rating him even at the same level as like Rashawn Slater and calling him a definitive superstar. He's still getting there. I think he will at some point. He could absolutely get there at some point this season. And that itself would help bump up your offensive line rankings here for the Chargers a little bit. But it really is, like I said, about these guards being the question mark here that could potentially still hold this offensive line back, even though you get those two tackles back, especially at left guard. I mean, we're now here in week 2 of the preseason, and they have no idea who's gonna win this competition. They keep rotating these guys around and trying to figure it out. And it's almost like when you go on a trip and you get to your destination and you realize the thing that you forgot to pack. It's kind of like the Chargers got through their offseason and they're like, oh crap, we forgot to pack a left guard. Now we gotta rummage together, an outfit here. We gotta figure this thing out. And they're going through it, right? Like, okay, Kyoto Awasika, who started some games for Detroit, he gets after it in the run game. There's some signs there. Pass blocking's been a liability for him. So that would leave you major question marks if he's starting. Trey Pipkins is an option here. They don't want to go that route. That's more of the like, we know what that looks like and it's not great, but it might be our best option type of path. He started the 2024 season at guard after they acquired Joe Alt. Pipkins was signed prior to that as a tackle. Now, like, I'm listing him there as a tackle because we don't know necessarily where he's going to play. Gets the 68 rating as a tackle, which itself isn't great. He's been more of a problem player for the Chargers than anything, and them maybe not wanting him to win the left guard spot above all could just be fan frustration. Like, really, we're still doing the Trey Pipkins thing here in 2026? Okay. But for example, if we were to kick him over to the interior O-line, that 68 rating would maybe come down a spot or two as well. Because when he had to start at guard in 2024, it was not pretty. He clearly is better at tackles. So that's not ideal, obviously. Trevor Penning is kind of a similar story where drafted as a tackle, he's played some guard. I think Trevor Penning's run blocking ability is the best individual trait of the 3 guard options we've listed there, but his pass blocking would be viewed as the worst. That's just an area of his game that he wasn't even good at Northern Iowa and hasn't been able to figure it out at the next level. But if they want someone that's an athlete and nasty in the run game that Mike McDaniel can at least weaponize in one phase of the game, they might lean in that direction. And then you have second round pick Jake Slaughter, who they would love for him to win this job. It sounds like he's not standing out, and not to be a dick about it, but like I thought this was an egregious overdraft. I watched Jake Slaughter at Florida. He played center. I thought he was kind of a dime a dozen day 3 center prospect. He's got decent size, not great athleticism, didn't love the play strength. I thought his tape was draftable as kind of a long-term like swingman on the interior of your offensive line. I was stunned to see his name come across the board in the second round of the draft. And I'm not really surprised that he's not winning this job. Now, he can still surprise, and there's still time for him to win that job and prove me wrong, but I'm not going to get excited about that, stepping in as a rookie. Like, that's a concerning breakdown of your left guard spot. And you don't even have right guard figured out either. I mean, they signed Cole Strange. He's more penciled in at right guard because he is, at this point, like clearly their best option as a guard. But that's not a good thing. I mean, he wouldn't start at guard for just about any team in the league, and he's your best guard. Kind of see how that floor gets dropped down here, right? Even though you have one of the best tackle duo, if not the best tackle duos in the NFL, depending on how the leaps Joe Alt takes this year. But yeah, Cole Strange was an overdrafted first-round pick that didn't work out for New England. He's got athleticism. He has played a good bit and played like a backup / like swing guard would play. He's a decent athlete. He checks some boxes. You just don't want him starting. He loses a lot. He falls off blocks a lot. He's just not a great player he's available for cheap for a reason. So that is your guard room. It ain't great, Bob. It's not. Now, you do have a floor raiser of a signing at center in Tyler Biadasz. I like that. You needed that. If you didn't have this, you put a question mark at center around those guard issues, and this could be a real problem. Biadasz is a cookie cutter, solid across the board starting caliber center, nothing more, nothing less. Gets about $10 million a year. That checked for me. I don't have too many takes beyond that on him. He's a very solid player. I think floor raiser is the proper term there. And that's pretty much your offensive line. There's a couple other interesting players here in terms of developmental tackles, Travis Burke and Isaiah World. And it's pretty clear to me, they looked at this and they were like, all right, we love our starting tackles, but with what we endured last year, we need to develop more of a cheap, insurance policy here down the road. And they're hoping either Burke or World can turn into pretty solid backup plans at tackle. And I think Burke makes sense, especially if you're viewing him as we got him here on a 4-year deal to back up one of these tackles in the event of injury. I don't know that Burke has super high-end developmental upside to be a franchise tackle. It's possible. He tested really well and he's huge. He's 6'8.5", 325 pounds, 34.5-inch arms. He's a freight train of an offensive lineman, but his feet are slow. And if you talk about a tackle on an island, you want that range in your kick slide. You want the agility to cut off inside moves. I worry that that's going to be a limiting factor for him as a franchise tackle. But if you have that one limitation and you're big, strong, nasty, technically sound, you can be a pretty good swing tackle. It is interesting though, because I don't think you can take that and play that at guard. They kind of tried that with Mekhi Becton and went through that last year. Doesn't really sound like Travis Burke, from what I've seen, is in the mix in the guard spot there. I think they really view him as a developmental tackle. And then Isaiah World was also interesting to me. I had him just a few spots behind Travis Burke as a kind of, day 3 option for developmental tackle depth. World's kind of the inverse of Burke, where he's a little bit more lanky, but he can really move. Isaiah World's movement ability really did stand out to me, and there's a reason he was heading into the year looked at as a potential first-round pick. But yeah, he needs to bulk up and improve the play strength aspect, and he needs to improve his technique for sure. He did, forgive me, I can't remember the injury, but he suffered, I think it was in the last game of the year. Yeah, it was, I'm almost positive it was the game against Texas Tech, the playoff game where David Bailey started going off with backup tackles in the game. That was where Isaiah World, I think, either tore his ACL or broke his leg or something, but he wasn't able to do any of the pre-draft process, is currently listed as injured. Might be one of these deals where they can just stash him on an IR while he develops and kind of keep an extra roster spot in that sense. But I like bringing him in, and he should be someone to keep an eye on long term. I would even argue he has theoretically more developmental upside than Travis Burke. But that's kind of the rest of what they're looking for. You do have recent draft picks too, in Branson Taylor, Alex Harkey, Logan Taylor. They could surprise in that guard competition. It doesn't sound like any of those guys have necessarily stood out, but those are all 6th round picks. Harkey and Taylor this year and Branson Taylor last year. So I didn't watch either of the Taylors there. I did watch Alex Harkey. He was Isaiah World's teammate. He was kind of a heavy-footed right tackle that projects as a guard convert at the next level. Wouldn't be stunned if Harkey is a decent guy to slide inside. But obviously, like all those guys, 6th round picks, lowered expectations, and would have to surprise if they're going to help you out here. So it's all about fixing these guards. It is the biggest question mark wild card from a roster standpoint on this Chargers team, and that's not a hot take. I think that was what any Chargers fan expected me to say heading into this video. But where does this offense land when you put this all together? Well, they came out as my 7th ranked offense as a floor ranking heading into this season. I say it all the time. This series is all about proven commodities, ranking teams close to their floor as we head into week 1. We covered a lot of the aspects where this team could shatter those expectations, and you certainly see the upside with the run game, with Marion Hampton climbing up in the running back rankings. Check. The upside with this group of weapons, I thought it was there, and I even talked myself into hyping it up even more as we started going through that unit. There is a ton of upside with these weapons and some unproven commodities there. The offensive line, if they can fix this guard spot, that's a top 10 offensive line with just baseline adequate guard play. That's a bigger question mark for sure, but especially if that happens, the Chargers could have the best offense in the NFL this year. I do believe that is their upside if some of these green lights can get hit. And that's pretty freaking fun to say that about this team. But that's just one side of the ball. Let's flip over and discuss this now Jesse Minnerless Chargers defense, and if the Chargers can expect the same level of defensive support that they've gotten over the years to complement what should be the best offense that they've had in the Jim Harbaugh era. And with at least some level of a downgrade with the coaching staff to be reasonably expected here, obviously you're hoping to make up some ground with the roster. So let's start with the D-line and ask if they got better on the D-line. And in my opinion, they did get at least a little bit better. You look at the interior of the D-line, I did say neutral there. You lose Deshaun Hand, who was a decent player for them. They signed Dalvin Tomlinson, who's an older player, but should be a decent player for them on the interior. You flip Otito Agbanya, a draft pick that didn't really work out for them, and roll the dice again on a big run stuffer type in Nick Barrett. We'll see what he can do. But yeah, I said neutral at interior D-line, but on the edge, I actually called this upgraded. And one of the areas I think, the highest on with this Chargers team is the addition of Akeem Mesidor, who I freaking loved. We'll continue to talk about him here. But I would say a full season of Akeem Mesidor is an upgrade over the final half of the season where you got Odafe Oweh. A potentially controversial take to call that an upgrade, but as we see here, as we open up the book on this defensive line, I've got a pretty damn close rating to Akeem Mesidor just coming in as a quote-unquote rookie at 25 years old than I did on Odafe Oweh here, who obviously played well, but I am taking a full season of what I expect from Mesidor over Oweh. But why don't we start there, on the edge and with Akeem Mesidor, who, even though I can't come out and quite give him a higher rating than Thule, who I do like in my own right, and even an aging Khalil Mack, I think it's quite possible that Akeem Mesidor is this team's best edge rusher as a rookie. It proves to be a phenomenal draft pick. And basically this team looks pretty smart for saving the money on Oweh and investing that in a draft pick here. And a big reason I talked about why I liked Mesidor as high as, top 10 at points in this draft to the right team is you look at contract value and Will Anderson getting $50 million, and even like an Oweh or, Jalen Phillips, like even pretty good edge rushers are getting what like freaking Devon Witherspoon just got for the Seahawks. Like you got to pay that guy almost close to quarterback money at times here. So to hit on a first round pick that I think can be the level of player that Akeem Mesidor could be, can be a game changer for your team management and finding that money and putting it elsewhere into your team. But as a player, I think Mesidor is a pretty rare prospect in the sense of like how complete he is coming out. And yeah, a big part of that is because he's 25 years old. But this is like the flip side of all these raw developmental prospects, your Shamar Stewarts and Lucas Van Ness and these guys that you got to wait like 3 or 4 years just to find out if they're good. Yeah, any rookie has a level of bust potential, and you still got to see it at the next level. But if anybody is going to step into the league and just be good, be really good immediately, Akeem Mesidor projects in that way. Like, his age was put to good use. He developed better pass rushing technique than you will see from just about any edge prospect. And Jason Taylor did a phenomenal job as the D-line coach there in Miami. Mesidor has traits on top of the technique, not elite traits. I don't know that Mesidor projects as a future ideal number one type of piece. My pro comp for him actually ended up being Whitney Merciless, who had a great career as kind of the ideal Robin to another player's Batman, as a really high-end number two who could maybe live as a low-end number one if you have to survive in that sense. That's kind of the upside projection on Mesidor because, okay, he's not the biggest guy. He's not the strongest guy. He doesn't have the best speed, the best bend. It's all just pretty good. I think another player that comes to my mind with Akeem Mesidor is like Jonathan Grenard, who just has a little bit of everything, and that includes run defense in Akeem Mesidor's case, where like he's a pretty good run defender. I think he's going to make an impact on all 3 downs for this team. I'm just really a fan of this pick and optimistic of the level of impact he's going to make here in contributing towards what ended up my 15th ranked defensive line overall for the Chargers. They came in 15th to 18th for pass rush there. Very good. And then even higher for D-line run defense, by the way, 9th to 13th. So we started with Mesidor there, but he is far from the only reason that they get pretty respectable rankings for this defensive line. You got Tui Pelotu in here as well, who has already established himself, I would say, as a really good number 2. Some Chargers fans might look at the double-digit sack total from last year and say he's going to be even more than that. I don't know how realistic that is. Talk about another guy that isn't the fastest guy, doesn't have all of the requisite like high-end physical traits that almost always are required to be a number one like alpha Batman on your defensive line. But short of that, Tule's a really good player, man. You talk about technique and quickness and the ability to leverage that. He is great with his hands. He's got quick feet for a bigger edge rusher. He's got pretty good power, not elite power. You know, that's what we're talking about, like speed, power being such a valuable trait. He's got a little bit of it, but he's not going to dominate with the bull rush. He's more of a finesse style guy that's going to kind of set you up and manipulate you throughout the course of a game. And they actually have really done a great job. And hopefully the new staff continues to do this. I don't know why they wouldn't. This ended up being a pretty good draft call of mine. And a big reason I liked Tule was comparing him to someone like Zadarius Smith at the time, in that actually where he's most effective is as a stand-up rusher over guards, and just being willing to lean into that and leverage that and use that as an ability to get all three of your edge rushers out there at the same time. We saw this last year with Khalil, Tule, and Owe. It's going to be the same case this year where you can get Khalil, Akeem Mesidor, and Tuli Pelotu out there as well. But he's going to be a part of those five-man fronts and those third and pass situations where they're picking matchups and letting him go to work there. That is where he's at his best. And if he could just do that every single time, he maybe would be more of an elite player, because he is elite at that. Beating guys off the edge, he to me is more of a number two. He's a good player, not a standout elite one necessarily. He also uses that size to be a good run defender as well. So he's a really nice piece here. And then you've got 35-year-old Khalil Mack back here for another year with the Chargers. You know, the analysis on him is pretty simple, right? Like, he is showing his age. He's a Hall of Fame, like, once elite player that is just trending down. He doesn't have all of the tools that he once had, but he still has a good bull rush. He's done a really good job to evolve his game over the years and become a little bit more of a finesse player at times, and just has a little bit of everything. He's got those tricks in his bag, but yeah, in terms of threatening the top of a tackle's drop or consistently overwhelming you with the bull rush or having nasty inside counters, he can't move like he once did. And honestly, it was the speed to power ability that was always his best trait anyway. But he's still a really good player, and he gives it all against the run. He honestly, like, there are times where he's going to be even more valuable to the Chargers on earlier downs with his ability to set a hard edge and force teams into third and pass situations than he is as a rusher himself. But this is why the Mesidor pick was so necessary, because expecting Khalil Mack to just line up for 800 snaps and just be your 3-down starting edge rusher is pretty unreasonable expectations for him at his age. This allows you to limit his snap count, get him in when you need him, get the most of him when he is out there. And I really like that role for him. And then you got Bud Dupree, another pretty simple conversation, you know, doing it into his 30s here. He's a heavy-handed early down run defender. In an ideal world, they don't need him to get after the quarterback. That's never been his strength, but he can absolutely contribute still in this role. They have Kyle Kennard, a 4th-round pick from last year that they're, I think, hoping to be their long-term Bud Dupree player. I believe Kyle Kennard struggled with a handful of different injuries that limited his playing time last year. I still think he can become that type of player. It's a pretty important year, too, for him to kind of show that he's got it at the next level. But I think his expectations are somewhere in the Bud Dupree category of just be a solid number 3 for us. I think that's reasonable for a Kyle Kennard who's got the size and length and strength and had some good moments of physicality in college. Nadame Tucker follows Chris O'Leary over from Western Michigan, so that's fun. That's a fun narrative. He had some moments as a pass rusher, but you talk about a guy that kind of lacks those physical check marks to have much of an upside at the next level. I tend to be more interested in the small school or lower level of competition prospects that end up having a lot of traits. I tend to be more fascinated in them kind of making that jump to the next level than the guys that just kind of won because they're a higher floor type of player playing against lower level of competition. That's more of a Nadame Tucker. So this profile, just having done this over the years, like it's hard to find examples of guys like Nadame Tucker translating the next level. seventh year player, 6'2", 247 pounds, 31.5-inch arms, ran a 4.7 340. Nothing about him really stands out to you. Everything's below average in terms of traits. So I'll be pulling for him. It's a fun story, but expectations are pretty low there. Andre Carter also still trying to give it a run in the NFL. Was extremely skinny as an edge player playing at Army, where it's hard to bulk up and be NFL size. But at this point, it hasn't really come along. Maybe something changes this offseason. But I was fascinated by him coming out, and we'll see if this staff can turn him into anything here. Not that they need anything from Carter or Tucker anyway, because they do run 5 deep off the edge above them. But very good edge rush room, even if they lack that kind of dominant number one piece. And then your interior D-line is very reasonable. Tyler Tart's a good player. I think ideally he'd be your number 2, not your number 1, but they can make do. Big, strong, athletic guy that's had a good bounce back here with the Chargers. Good run defender. He gives you a little bit as a rusher in terms of pocket pushing ability and juice off the line, but just good all-around player. Dalvin Tomlinson, they bring in from Arizona. I actually put the yellow arrow on Dalvin Tomlinson because he's on the other side of 30. He's kind of in that regressing veteran nose tackle archetype. You see a lot of these guys around the league, but I will at least give Dalvin some benefit of the doubt in that the role he plays, it sucks to just take on double teams, get no credit, be a space eater. It's not fun to do that. And when you're on a team just like going through the motions and like you've kind of done it before and you're going somewhere else after the season, I'm willing to give him, I guess, a pass. Cardinals fans are like, no, you don't get a pass for that. But I'm willing to give him a little bit of a pass for maybe saving his energy a little bit for another run at this thing. With the Chargers here, in the sense that he could actually take a step back up even at his age. But obviously the fact that his play is regressing, as it did in Arizona last year at his age, there's a chance that he can't quite live up to the $7 or $8 million that they gave him. But I like the swing at him in a bounce back season opportunity, but they aren't counting on him. They have Jamari Caldwell, who was a very fascinating 3rd-round pick, who I thought did everything he needed to see in terms of improving his run defense technique. He was a fascinating prospect because he's a nose tackle build, but at Oregon kind of played upfield and was more of a like launch off the ball and try to penetrate type of style. But I definitely thought his best projection was earlier downs, sink those hips, anchor well, be that true run-stuffing D-tackle. And I think they coached him up how to do it. And there's a really good projection. He's got a ton of physical tools, and he even has upside to do that on your earlier downs, but then also leverage that ability to uncoil and bull rush a little bit. There's pass rushing ability in there as well from a just bull rushing pocket presence, pocket pushing perspective as well. So I like Jamari Caldwell to continue to get better here. You got Justin Aboigbe. So they let Deshaun Hand go, who was kind of that undersized, like 4-eye. If they're in a base 3-4 front, that's largely where that guy's going to play. I think they trust Aboigbe to fill into that role. Aboigbe is young. He's in year 3 now. He's incrementally developed into being a rotational base end for them. And I think that's reasonable that he could kind of replace Deshaun Hand and take another step towards being a pretty nice player in that role. So you're running like 4 deep in terms of guys that you largely trust there, which is good. And then I like the Nick Barrett pick as well. I thought he had good run defense tape coming out of South Carolina. 6'3", 327. I love that they have size here. And you need that if you're going to play a base nickel and ask these guys to 2-gap and take guys on it. It frustrates me, some of these teams that think you can live in base nickel with all these 280, 290-pound D tackles and expect certain teams to not try to take advantage of that. The Chargers are like, no, we got Tyler Tart, Dalvin Tomlinson, Caldwell, Nick Barrett. Aboigbe's a little more undersized, but they use him right. So I appreciate the construction there, and that's definitely how you end up pushing top 10 for D-line run defenses. They got the right bodies to do it, and good run defenders off the edge on top of that. But yeah, I think Nick Barrett probably not going to play a ton as long as these guys are healthy, but as Dalvin is here for just a year, Nick Barrett can step into those shoes and have some good mentors here. So they're building this thing up with some good size between the edge. I really like that. You are lacking in terms of interior pass rush from a traditional sense. Really, their best interior rusher is going to be Thule lining up over guards with Khalil Mack and Mesidor playing more off the edge. And Mesidor, by the way, can also rush from the interior if they want to move guys around a little bit. But yeah, very, very solid defensive line with a little bit of upside to get better from there. Maybe not a lot of bit of upside, but can certainly climb up a few more spots and be a pretty good overall contribution to this defense. And maybe it's fair to say the best defensive line they've had in this new regime. But let's go to linebacker here. They made no changes this offseason at linebacker, so obviously staying neutral there. Running it back with Diane Henley and your kind of combination of Denzel Perriman, Troy Dye, and yes, Derwin James as more of your third down linebacker here. And we'll get to Derwin and how he kind of gets utilized and needs to play into the picture for linebacker here in a way that we don't list a lot of safeties with the linebacker room and why we do that here. But yeah, Diane Henley, he is an example of the idea that progression isn't always linear to me. He actually took a step back last year in year 3 after showing progression in the first 2 years of his career. For whatever reason, his number of defensive stops, despite playing almost an identical number of snaps, just 80 less snaps. So like one less game basically worth of snaps. It goes from 50 in 2024 for defensive stops to 30 last season.
This is a joke. Are we having a great time? Are you okay with this? Is this funny?
Just was not able to get himself around the ball as often. And I don't think really lived up to big expectations to take another leap into being a top 8 or so linebacker that were reasonable expectations coming off of a first year as a starter in 2024 that was really impressive. But it's not enough to deter me from still keeping the up arrow on Diane Henley. The fact that he's still this good heading into year 4 is still encouraging. He's still ahead of the learning curve for most young linebackers and third-round linebackers like him. So contract year, I think this could be a really nice season for Diane Henley. He's really balanced. I think his run diagnostics are good. Where he did improve last year was his missed tackle percentage. Almost cut it in half from 12% to 7% from 2024 to 2025. So I like that. He got better in some categories there. But yeah, he's got really good zone IQ and has really fluid hips and can move well in coverage. There's a lot of upside with him. So I'm still keeping the up arrow on him. He took a step back last year, but I still feel really good about him as your LB1 and kind of your centerpiece of your linebacker room here. And then you kind of just have a little bit of everything after that. Like Denzel Perriman will show up as like the kind of de facto LB2. Talk about aging vets. This is obviously not how it goes, but I like to imagine that on game day, Jim Harbaugh and O'Leary just kind of, get to the security check gate. They show their credentials, and then in the list of that process, they ask, is Denzel Perriman going to play today? And they just get a thumbs up or a thumbs down because it's basically a week-to-week question with him and has been for like 5 years. But if he's available, you know exactly what he's going to do. He's going to be a gap-filling, run-stuffing smasher that's going to bring the energy. He's going to fire your team up. He's probably going to get himself hurt doing so. Not much of a coverage impact. I think he's got instincts. He's a better coverage player than he has historically gotten credit for, but you can get him because he just doesn't move all that well in space. But as long as he's available, which will probably be 8 or 9 games, he's going to help your run defense. In the games that he's not available, you'll play Troy Dye, who's filled in valiantly and developed nicely. He's a nice backup linebacker. He'd be an okay starter on a lot of teams. Troy Dye himself has developed pretty good balance and competency to his game. And there's even been some moments where he's really flashed as a run defender where you might even beg the question of like, do we reach a point this season where Troy Dye kind of overtakes Denzel Perriman and you actually have a healthy duo of like really good linebackers? Part of me thinks that's possible. Part of me is like, well, why is Perriman still listed as the starter ahead of Troy Dye? I think that's fascinating, but I'm curious if Chargers fans think this is the year that Troy Dye just becomes the LB2 and Perriman takes more of a back seat, and if maybe we should have the up arrow on Troy Dye. I think it's debatable. But then after that, you got like Delshon Phillips. I don't think the expectations are too high for him. Junior Colston's been a severe disappointment. Really a draft enigma. This was supposed to work, man. He had good tape at Michigan. He was a thumper. He had good run diagnostics for a young player. The Harbaugh connection, the Jesse Minter connection. Nope. Everything's been off with Junior Colston. And I wouldn't be stunned if he gets cut because there's just no buzz with him at all. It's like something's just missing. I don't know. In fact, I saw this morning Stephen Hagelin, who's been our guest, and that's my fault that I didn't get Stephen on this year. I'm just running out of time to do guest interviews to get this series done in time. But I saw Stephen tweeting out that did I say Max Warlow? Marlowe Wax? What a name, but I guess he's looked good. So I'm not familiar with his game, but maybe we'll see if we should keep an eye on him. But after Troy Dye, you're not, I don't think, jumping off the wall with your linebacker depth, which you might have to get into pretty quick, knowing Denzel Perriman's just not going to be there for half the season. But we have to talk about Derwin James, who plays about as much linebacker, like actual linebacker, as any safety in the NFL. Maybe Josh Metellus, but to be fair, we put Josh Metellus in the Vikings linebacker graphic as well and baked him into their linebacker ratings. Derwin last year played 41% of his snaps as a linebacker, and that comes in two ways. It comes in that base nickel formation we talked about, where if the opponent is in 12 personnel or 21 personnel, which is two wide receivers on the field, Derwin will slide in and be this team's weak side linebacker, and that 4-2 nickel turns into a 4-3 base with him playing that weak side backer. But he also will play linebacker in their dime defense, where they will take Derwin out of the slot corner position. They'll put Dante Jackson out there, and I'll show the defensive back graphic now just so you can kind of see how that could play. They'll slide Tarheeb Still into the nickel. Cam Hart and Dante Jackson will play outside, and then Derwin will move into linebacker. So he'll get another, 150, 200 snaps as that kind of like dime linebacker role, more play in the middle of the field. So he's in there playing. I mean, he played more snaps as a linebacker than Denzel Perriman last year, with Perriman missing 6 games. But yeah, you got to factor him in. He helps out the coverage especially, but if they just straight up said Derwin is just a linebacker now, like we've seen sometimes with these older safeties, I think he's still like an okay run defender. Like he's got the length and instincts and quickness to get off blocks. Yes, he will get he would get consumed against duo and guards climbing up to him. Like he is 215 pounds, but like so is Jamien Sherwood, who's just the starting linebacker for the Jets. So was, at a point in time, Foye Oluokun was listed at 215 pounds, though I think he plays closer to 230 nowadays. But yeah, Derwin could like legitimately just be a pretty good linebacker, and his coverage relative to other linebackers is special. And he's a great blitzer as well, largely off the edge, but if you want to blitz him up the middle as a part of those rush packages, you can absolutely do that as well. So you got to bake in Derwin to this whole equation. And when you do, they end up to me as the 18th overall linebacker room. If Henley takes that step forward, this is going to push top 10 pretty quickly. For like the splits with the run defense here, they're 19th to 22nd, 8th to 14th for coverage. You can see with Henley being pretty good at it and Derwin rotating in there, they're like pushing more top 10 for linebacker coverage. And if Derwin just played every snap as a linebacker, they'd be like top 5. But you got to bake in like you're gonna catch Perriman and die in coverage as well. So that drags it down a touch. But overall, a very useful, versatile set of linebackers when you put the whole picture together. But yeah, we'll go to that secondary next, and we can get there pretty quickly because the offseason changes are very minimal. The only loss is Benjamin St-Juste at cornerback. Not enough for me to call the unit overall downgraded, but he's a loss. He played well in a rotational role. And then at safety, the only addition is a 4th-round pick in Genesis Smith, which I'm not going to call the safety room upgraded, but that's really your only change with the secondary. And I said neutral overall into the 3rd level of the defense here. But we already snuck a sneak peek here at this secondary, but it's a pretty solid overall Chargers secondary here. They rank almost exactly in the middle of the league, 15th to 16th for me. They're in that giant cluster for coverage rating for their secondary, which is just a big tier this year, which is 15th to 24th. They're right in that grouping, but they do kind of get the tiebreaker over those because of the run defense factor, largely contributed to by Derwin and what he does to fill the run from the secondary. But what I have said about that large cluster of secondaries in the middle of the league is like, some of them have upside to climb out of that grouping. Some of them have some riskiness to it where they would rank higher, but some of them have some more downside with some other risks and stuff to maybe drop below that ranking. And then there's a couple teams like the Chargers here where it's like, yeah, I kind of think that's about what this secondary is. It's middle of the pack. Nothing really pops to me, especially when we've already kind of taken a lot of the stuff that Derwin does and applied that to the linebacker room. Like, Derwin's the best player here, but if we're just assessing Derwin as a coverage slot corner / safety, he's pretty good. But, we're not going to talk about him like I would with like Brian Branch or Devon Witherspoon when he plays the nickel, or these like great standout coverage players. Like, okay, Derwin has his pros and cons. Like he is stiffer than he once was. He doesn't have incredible range. He takes his losses defending wide receivers as a slot corner, but he's very heady. He's got length. He plays the ball. He's just very good as a coverage member of your secondary. Once you start to bake in what he does in a linebacker role relative to other linebackers, that's where he's superb. Additionally, like, he can be a tight end eraser if used correctly as well. So that is where he deserves credit. Where you really feel the Derwin impact is, again, as a run defender, where he gives you something very few defensive backs do to legitimately fill the run. We just praised his ability as a linebacker, where he could legitimately like hold a candle next to other real NFL linebackers. So to be a member of your secondary and still be a pretty good coverage player back there, but also be able to flip down into the box and do that, that's the biggest asset that shows up. And having good support from your secondary does really matter. So it's not that he's not making an impact here. It's just, it's a little more unconventional, and you got to kind of talk around it a little bit more and explain that, like, okay, he's not perfect, but he's really freaking good. But with that out of the way, I think everybody else just gives you a really nice floor, but maybe not a ton of upside with the remaining players here to get like overly excited about how good this secondary could be. We'll start with Tarheeb Still, who's your number one corner, and I think he's a really good player. I see a smart zone corner that plays a lot of zone here. Not the most physically gifted player in the world, but he plays the ball. He does his job inside this system. I like that. One thing that is fascinating with Still that you could even, I guess put a small yellow arrow on is the run support. Because as a rookie, he was a great tackler, and that's a big deal in this system that plays off zone and invites underneath passes. You got to rally. You got to get guys on the ground. You do not want to allow extra yards after a catch, or it kind of defeats the whole purpose of this off zone system. And both him and Cam Hart took major steps back as tacklers last season. Still especially dropped from 16.5%, which is already, that is actually kind of below average. He definitely gets after it in the run game. It's not a block shedding or pursuit or effort problem. So you did actually get some missed tackles in his rookie year, but he goes from 16.5 in his rookie year to 21.5% last year. We got to at least get that back to 16.5. But Hart, he went from 5% in his rookie year down to 13.5% last year, almost triple missed tackle rate. So both these guys were not as good at getting guys to the ground, which I'd love to see them improve upon. But I think from a coverage perspective, you've got a really nice floor with what Tarheeb still brings to the table. And I guess the biggest thought I have on Tarheeb still is more of a tangent and a macro kind of team building philosophy in terms of how I would be constructing my secondary. Something I've been thinking a lot about lately as I see Devon Witherspoon getting $33 million today. And to be clear, I think he's worth it. But for me, the middling contract corners give me a hard time. The guys that are going to make $22 million, like Diamador Lenore making $20 million. And we'll see what Tarheeb still ends up making. Right now, he's obviously on year 3 of his rookie contract, which is ideal. But for me, it's I'd rather either have the rare shutdown corner where there's only 5 or 6 of them in the league. If I'm not getting one of those guys, give me the Tarheeb Stills of the world where, okay, you accept they aren't shutdown corners, but their floor is high enough and you don't have to pay them a lot of money and you can put them in an off-zone system and just kind of forget about it. I think that's a good piece to have in that sense. And I think Cam Hart is kind of in that category too. Hart's a little stiffer, less on demand as a coverage player, if you will. I think he's even more gettable as a route runner to get open against. But as in tight coverage, if you want to press, Cam Hart would be the guy you want to press against an AJ Brown or something like that. He's not going to beat him every time, but they're slightly different stylistically. But Hart as well gives you a pretty good floor as a starting corner that's realistically not going to be super expensive. So you get a nice floor with those two guys. And then, still can flip into the nickel because he's got some quickness and zone IQ to move around like that. And Dante Jackson will step outside. And this is yet another example of how this staff has built a roster here where they are good at limiting certain guys' deficiencies. We saw a lot of that with the D-line, the linebacker room, just kind of how they rotate guys, where they use them. Dante Jackson's another example of this. You talk about the importance of tackling in an off-zone system. Well, Dante Johnson cannot tackle, but they only really play him in passing downs. And ideally on 3rd and 8, which can still be an issue, but more often than not, if you're giving up a catch on 3rd and 8, it's going to be past the line of scrimmage. Whereas if it's 1st and 10, you're going to get targeted on a quick hitch or screen, and the opponent's going to force you to tackle and limit run after catch. So that's how they get the most out of Dante Jackson, where from a coverage angle, is he perfect? No, he's a risk taker. He's undersized, but he's fast and he likes to jump stuff. And as a third corner that comes in off the bench fresh, he can make some plays for this team. So he's a really nice piece off the bench or in your dime rotation as Derwin moves into nickel. And that's kind of your starting 4 corners, if you will, with Derwin in there. You got Dean Leonard, who's been around as a late day 3 pick, and Nico Reed played a little bit last year, but you're pretty unproven in depth after Dante Jackson, and that rounds out your full cornerback room. And then you go to the safeties. You got Elijah Molden, converted slot corner to safety, who's been a nice find for this team. He did have a down year last year, was a little injured, was credited with more touchdowns allowed, and only found his way to get his hand on the ball one time with 1 interception this year. So the production was quite poor last year after they paid him. I ultimately feel pretty good about what Elijah Molden is. I think that's largely just variance at safety for a player that isn't a superstar. coverage can just be, especially if you're not a shutdown player, it just can be a more high variance thing from year to year. So I'm not really worried about Molden. I'm not like putting the down arrow on him. I don't feel the need yet to panic about him having some coverage problems last year and like lower his rating from how I felt about him heading into last year. I think he will just settle back in as a good deep safety for this team because I trust his skills and IQ and instinct. I think I like what he is as a player for how they use him as more of that true deep safety. As in a split safety defense, you're either running cover 4, cover 6, as that 2 shell look, or they're going to if they rotate into cover 3, it's almost always going to be Molden rotating high, and then Jefferson as the other starting safety rotating down most often. Sometimes they might mix it up just to keep offenses on their heels, but Tony Jefferson definitely profiles as more of a true strong safety at his age. Always has, but especially at his age. He turns 35 this year, but this is one of the more underrated stories in the NFL. And the fact that he came in 2024, he was a scout for the Ravens, Harbaugh Academy East, right? And just kind of picked up his cleats and came back to the Chargers when they had some safety issues at the end of the 2024 season and looked pretty good. And then he decides to give it another go in 2025, and he ends up their starting safety for half the season, especially after they trade Alohi Gilman and he got healthy. He was hurt right around the time they traded Gilman, and then he comes back into that starting role. But he is the definition of why you don't need to be blazing fast to play in a split safety defense. In fact, he ran a 4.75 coming out in 2013. I don't know what he would run now at 35 years old, but he sees the game from the back end about as well as anybody. So he understands when to collapse down from a quarters assignment, in a hook zone assignment. You don't have to have quite as much range. And I would actually be curious if anyone had the numbers on like just how often Tony Jefferson rotated into a single high coverage in cover 3, because I wouldn't be stunned if they just literally did away with the surprise factor of potentially rotating him deep and just said, no, we're not doing that, because I would imagine he would find himself in trouble if he had to play more deep safety. But just kind of patrolling that middle of the field, keeping his eyes on the route development in tandem with keeping his other eye on the quarterback, anticipating things, playing the run, and tackling from a top-down assignment. Like, he does enough to be a competent safety back there. And I just think it's really fun. And I can't even put the down arrow on him because he's been better the last 2 years than he was the last 3 years of his career before he went and became a scout. So, he's obviously going to have to hang the cleats back up at some point here, but it's really fun to see what he's doing. And right now he seems to be edging out RJ Mickens, who did play well as a day 3 pick last year, was a good value add where they got him out of Clemson. And I think Mickens projects right in this conversation. They've got all these like lowly investments that have carved out like high floor roles in this secondary. I think RJ Mickens can do that, especially if he learns how to tackle. They're going to want to see him do that. That's probably the core reason why they're rolling with Jefferson right now over Mickens. Mickens, no doubt, gives you more coverage upside and range and matchup ability. He can move. But yeah, he's got to become a better tackler. If that can happen, I think you have another starting safety someday in this mold. But for now, they're going to go with Tony Jefferson, and no reason to think he can't do it again. If he can come out of retirement at 33, play better at 34, I think he can play at 35. So he's your kind of final starting piece there. And then they did also draft Genesis Smith here as a 4th round pick. Smith got some day 2 love, which I always thought was crazy, but I ended up with a 5th round grade on him. He ends up going in the 4th there. He's got moments from the back end where he does have legit range and ball skills, and there's an upside aspect of his game that you like there. Horrible tackler, though. Like way worse than we described with Mickens. Like, I don't know that Smith can play until he proves that he can tackle better. But if he starts to get good coaching here and things start to click where he becomes a more consistent coverage player on the back end, he also has starting potential. So fair enough. As a 4th-round pick, I didn't hate it at that point. Kendall Williamson has played a little bit here, and then you got 3 other guys vying probably for a practice squad spot. But yeah, there's your Chargers secondary. It's a really solid unit. There's really no weaknesses here. Nobody you're circling as dominant coverage players either, though. So I'm fully expecting this to be kind of a middle-of-the-pack coverage unit. I think the biggest area for growth is honestly more consistent tackling from Tarheeb Still and Cam Hart. But beyond that, I'm not expecting a major leap forward this year with the talent base of this secondary. So let's tie this Chargers defense together and discuss where I've got them. So they came out as my 18th defense heading into this season. And I think that makes sense. We're talking about a Chargers defense that has kind of been like this, where the floor is really good at every unit. Some players have come and gone and moved a little bit, but it's largely been the case where it's a solid defensive roster, which Jesse Minter has elevated to be a top 10 defense in the 2 years that he's been here. You don't have the Jesse Minter factor baked into this equation right here. Maybe O'Leary can be a wonderful signing and someone we're talking about in December about the amazing job he's done and what a hire this was. I think that's possible. We just cannot possibly know what he's going to bring to the table with his resume and lack of doing anything really at the NFL level. But that's really the main question mark. I think there's little pockets of upside with the roster to maybe push this up a little bit, but it's not anything drastic at the end of the day. You're really, to me, just looking at a pretty high floor defense that you're hoping to get the same elevation from a new coach. So they came out as my 18th ranked defense at the end of the day, which is obviously lower than the top 10 unit that they've got in the last 2 years. So the one side of the ball left to talk about here is this Chargers special teams, which also ranks quite high. They rank 7th on special teams. Jim Harbaugh has done a great job of getting the special teams right here, which has been an issue for so many years. Obviously, he's not the special teams coordinator. We should give some credit to Ryan Ficken there as well. But you have great specialists here. You've got Cameron Dickers, one of the better kickers in the league. J.K. Scott is one of the best punters in the league, and likewise with Darius Davis, who did have a down year last year. You want to see him bounce back as a returner, but just a year before that, he was at worst a Pro Bowler, if not an All-Pro return man. But yeah, you got the specialists figured out. They actually graded out pretty poorly last year, both per PFF and DVOA team success. So some of the other things, whether that would be, long snaps and tackling on kick coverage and stuff, hurting them in that sense, because obviously the specialists were doing their job. And to be fair, Darius Davis wasn't as good last year. But overall, this should be a good special teams this year. Other than just them chargering it up in a old school type of way, you should expect more success with the special teams. So as we really tie this team together, one very fascinating point that doesn't have too much to do with the Chargers here is that there are more than one way to skin a cat, because as I was putting the team summary page together here, it blew me away how little I actually had to change with the template from our last team, the 49ers, to the Chargers here. The team ratings with how my formula spit these two teams out, almost identical. And it is a reminder of how close these teams ultimately are to each other, not just the Chargers and Niners, but all these teams. But Chargers 84.2 on offense, Niners 84.3. Defense, 79.8 for the Chargers, 79.7 for the Niners. Honestly, the divider there is special teams. 82.1 for the Chargers, 79.8 for the Niners. So honestly, this is a case where the special teams was kind of a tiebreaker between these two teams. Special teams doesn't typically play much of a factor, but you see it show up there. But anyway, there's more than two ways to skin a cat, because we did the Niners deep dive. That team couldn't have been any more different. They are like volatile across the board, injury prone players galore. You got superstars left and right, lack of depth and low floor in other places. This Chargers team, outside of their like unfortunate record of getting hurt, there are almost no questions with the Los Angeles Chargers. And when we look at my Venn diagram of strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors, I don't have a weakness for this team. You tell me, what is the weakness of the LA Chargers? Very high floor football team in that sense. However, I only have 3 true strengths, and 2 of them are related to the coaching staff. So only one roster strength, and that is Justin Herbert at quarterback. The other 2 strengths, of course, are offensive coaching under Mike McDaniel and the overall coaching culture. We talked about that at the beginning. The perfect marriage of the McDaniel plus Harbaugh factor could be a game changer for the Chargers here. But we've had teams as well that have a longer list of pivotal wild card factors that can swing things in either direction. The list is shorter with the Chargers. It's the offensive line, which we talked about. That's the big question mark from a roster standpoint. They got to get that guard situation figured out. And then Chris O'Leary, who we've highlighted as well. Can you get anything close to the impact from him that you got from Jesse Minter? And if you can lift that defense up, okay, so let's say their floor is pretty high as our 18th ranked defense. Can we get 14th on defense with better contributions than our C+ grade for the defensive coaching there? All right, you pair a top 14 defense that would technically qualify as a playoff caliber defense with 14 teams making the playoffs now. And then offensively, things really click into place. You got a top 5 or so offense. That's a team pushing for Super Bowl contention. But at the same time, you can still look back on this and say, there is a general lack of star talent with the LA Chargers, especially on the defensive side of the ball in terms of real upside to dominate there come playoff time. But offensively, wouldn't rule it out that everything clicks into place and this team could just go nuclear. Gonna be fun to watch regardless. Lastly, though, we do need to get into actual prediction territory from me, not just how we're ranking this team heading into week 1. So let's look at their schedule and what my actual win prediction is for the Chargers. And this is a bit of a roller coaster schedule for the Chargers, where you get nice, easy start, about as easy of a week 1 and 2 as you could draw up. Cardinals, Raiders, week 1, week 2. All right, get off to a 2-0 start, Chargers. Like, go get it done, because your next 2 months fucking suck. Starting week 3, you go at Buffalo, at Seattle, Denver, at Kansas City, bye week, at the Rams, host the Texans, and then at Baltimore. Those are your next 7 games. I think if we were to put together the hardest 7-game stretches that any team in the NFL has this year, that would compete. So a lot of their season is going to be, I hate to say decided, but their mettle is going to be tested there. And I just will say, if this team doesn't win those first 2 games, as we kind of are getting towards the start of the season here, something to keep on your radar. Like, if the Chargers don't get off to that 2-0 start, they could fall behind this thing in a hurry, even if they just split that schedule, which is going to be asking a lot. But on the flip side of that, it's important to keep in the back of our minds, if we get to week 10 and this is a 4-5 football team, something to keep in mind is, like, it lightens up. This team could absolutely be that horse that comes from behind and sprints towards the finish line. You got Jets at home. You got the Patriots at home. Tough game, but winnable. Got at Tampa, at the Raiders, host the Niners. Gonna be more of a home game for the Niners, unfortunately. At Miami, host Kansas City. Not the easiest stretch, but can they go 5-2 there, get things back on track, and ramp things up for a really fascinating game at Denver week 18? I think you can easily see it playing out that way. So for me, considering this schedule, I'm still optimistic about the Chargers. I am. I believe in the offense. I think the defense will be okay. I don't have crazy expectations at all, but I really am buying into the Mike McDaniel offense, these playmakers, the run game being really good here. Even if you have some guard problems, I think it'll still be a better offensive line than last year, and everything else should be better. I think it's underrated that Keenan Allen's gone too. So really buying into that, helping this team win games, survive that tough stretch. I think they'll pick up their losses in the middle of the season there. I do. Or in that 3-10 stretch. But I think they can at least start 5-4, maybe 6-3, and then you win 5 or 6 of those remaining games from week 11 on, which will get you to 11 wins and very much in contention in the AFC West, in the wild card, in the Super Bowl mix. I will say this, me ranking the Chargers 10th leaves me lower than them in terms of Super Bowl odds. This caught my eye that they're 5th in Super Bowl odds. I kind of get it because of the offensive upside, and this is an offensive league. But I just think the defense, I just don't see being a dominant factor for this team. And when we're talking about them being top 5 in Super Bowl odds, I think you have to bring up the fact that Justin Herbert has not played well in the playoffs, at least as a slight ding on that. Hopefully that doesn't become a factor, right? But it does start to creep in my mind when you say this is a top 5 team in the NFL for Super Bowl odds. So that caught my eye. I don't know if the Chargers are my favorite Super Bowl bet necessarily, but at the end of the day, I think, predicting them to win 11 wins is still saying bet the over on this team. I think I'm still pretty optimistic about how this could go. And AFC is a little bit weaker this year. Who knows? Maybe we get to the playoffs and we see what happens. But we got one more thing here, my superlative awards for the Chargers. So for team MVP, and it's actually not a player, but let's say person, most valuable person, is going to end up being Mike McDaniel for me. And that's because I don't pick quarterbacks. If we did, it would be Justin Herbert. But yeah, I think the story of this team season is going to be how much Mike McDaniel gets this offense to cook, how easy of a decision it's going to be for a team to give him another chance as a head coach. And ultimately a pretty easy pick for MVP. Biggest wild card, I'm going to stick with the defense and Chris O'Leary, especially if it's an individual. I think the combination of guards could obviously be a candidate here. But if we're going with an individual, I will go with Chris O'Leary. Is clearly, for all the reasons we've described, a major wild card to give them anything close to the level of defensive coaching they had under Jesse Minter. Breakout offense. This was hard for me because there's 2 guys I really like. I went with Joe Alt because that feels safe. If I'm actually trying to predict things here, Joe Alt would have broken out last year if he didn't get hurt and broke out as I really think Joe Alt, this is the year now where we get to put him in top 5 tackle rankings and he's a demon and we're loving him up, right? That is a pretty easy breakout to see coming after he only got to play 6 games last year. The other guy I really wanted to put here, though, was Charlie Kolar. As we broke that tight end room down, I think he kind of trickles through and emerges as the every down, or at least the core starting tight end. Gadsden will still get his third and pass situations. But I think Kolar is going to be embraced here in a way that Baltimore didn't fully get to lean into because Mark Andrews was above Kolar in a way that Gadsden won't be because Mark Andrews blocks, right? So I don't think you're going to run into that dilemma here. Breakout defense. I'm going to go with Diane Henley here, probably doubling down on who would have been my pick last year. I do think he, after a little bit more of a quiet year last year, I think takes another leap forward this year. I love his game. I don't think in a landscape where there's not a ton of great linebackers, I don't think it's that much to ask for him to break through as a top 8 linebacker in the NFL. And I think that would be considered a breakout for Henley. Unsung hero. This was extremely hard, actually, as I looked at this. And the defense especially, I didn't really know who to go with necessarily. It feels like the entire defense is kind of a motley crew of solid players who sort of share an equal slice of the credit pie. So I had a hard time picking an unsung hero on defense. And offense as well was tough. I ended up, and this could bite me in the face, I ended up going with Quentin Johnston, just because if we're looking at this as kind of like the underrated player on the team award, I think Quentin Johnston's ultimately going to be a pretty solid number 2 wide receiver who's probably going to continue to get absolutely no credit here. And he also is probably this team's best bet at taking the top off of the defense, other than Brendan Thompson, I suppose. But yeah, that was a tough one. Who's your unsung hero for the Chargers? I would love to hear your pick there. And then fantasy MVP, I think with how I gassed up Ladd McConkey, I think that's a pretty safe explanation. I think he will be the engine of this team's first and second down passing game through all of the scheme stuff that Mike McDaniel does. And I think he's going to do a pretty damn good job on third down too, where he can get open. He's also Justin Herbert's chemistry guy in scramble drill. Yeah, I'm all over Ladd McConkey in fantasy this year. Love it. I don't even know where he's getting drafted. It ain't high enough. Give me Ladd McConkey 101. Kidding. Not kidding. Anyway, there's your Chargers deep dive. Thank you so much for watching. We are into the top 10 of this thing. Let me know who you think comes next in this series. It's a tough top 10 to predict, I think, and rank. This is a really tight-knit NFL in this. Honestly, from there's so many good teams this year. From 7 through 19, all the way down to the Dallas Cowboys. I would imagine that is as tight as the kind of final team ratings will have been over the last few years of this series. I might have to go back and double check that, but let me know who you think number 9 is. Please do hit that like button on the way out. If you are one of the audio podcast listeners as well, if you could take a second to leave a review of the Fully Inflated Football podcast, would appreciate you there as well. But that's all I got. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Cheers. Oh, and we got 20 hats left. Go buy a hat in the TFG store too.